you need to take up your space because you use couching language too much. And it's like, I don't use couching language because I lack confidence. I use couching language because I've been around the block enough times to know that while I'm 80% sure this answer is going to help you, there is a 20% chance that you are a special case that I have seen in the past that it won't work for. There's a 20% chance that there's something else circumstantial that neither of us are thinking about in the moment that affects the outcome. And there's a 20% chance that, you know what? It might be great advice. It might be valid advice, but it's not useful advice right now. Okay, it's not because I lack confidence. It's just because I'm confident that there are no absolutes in anything. And I am somebody who prides myself in honesty and integrity, and I think it's important to say that. We're wired for connection, but most of us are faking it to fit in. I'm Tonya Kubo, and this is Find Your Freaks, the podcast that flips the script and spotlights the quirks you thought you had to keep quiet. Subscribe now and head to findyourfreaks.com for show notes and extras. Because around here,
what makes you weird makes you wonderful. Normal was never the point.
Hey there, Tonya here. So since I recorded my last episode, which was my conversation with Jen Mackinnon of Practical by Default, something big has changed in my home and my household. I've started homeschooling again. So if you've been listening for a long time, or if you've been part of my ecosystem for a long time, you know that I have two children. They're 4.5 years apart. So my youngest is 12. And shortly, kind of middle of spring, right before spring break of this year, we started homeschooling again. And it's so funny because it's such a full circle moment for me to sit here and think about my interview with Jen, because it was a few months ago that we talked. But the whole reason that I encountered Jen for the first time is because I was considering homeschooling my eldest. And at that time, I was working full-time at a university. If you've listened to my interview with Jen, you already know this. And I was like, there's just no way in the world I could homeschool. Like, I'd have to quit my job. And somebody introduced me to Jen's online community. So she has a Facebook group called the Working Homeschool Mom Club. And it is, like it sounds, a Facebook group specifically for moms who work and homeschool. Now, they can work inside the home, they can work outside the home, they can be self-employed like I am, they can be a remote worker for somebody else, contract worker, W-2, whatever. And there are now over 30,000 members to the community, and they come from all over the globe. And so, I record this episode very differently than I initially had my episode planned for speaking about my interview with Jen. But a lot of the core points are still true. I would say the heart of my conversation with Jen is a much bigger question that we were toying around with, which is, who do you trust when everyone online sounds like an expert? When I was interviewing Jen, one of the things that we discussed is she leads one of the largest communities for working homeschool moms, one of the only communities for working homeschool moms. She has not only spent years supporting families trying to balance work and homeschooling, but she has graduated 2 children, right? Her kids are young adults. And the thing that, as soon as we hung up, I wish I would have come up with the words when we were talking in real time, because I think she would have had remarkable things to say. But really, as we were talking, one of the things that Jen has found, and if you are a homeschooling parent yourself, I think you will agree, is that the internet rewards confidence. The internet does not reward experience, and it does not necessarily reward success. The internet is a great place for finding ideas, right? You type it into your browser of choice and you come up with a ton of ideas. And these days, you don't even have to go through 10 different websites to get the answer to your question or to get the full context, right? You don't have to go read the ultimate guide to whatever. You can just read the AI summary and, whatever paragraph strikes your interest, just click that particular link and, you'll go to the website that has that paragraph in it. And that's assuming, you think to type into a search engine to begin with. A lot of people are having their conversations and doing their searches directly into an LLM, right? A large language model, whether that is ChatGPT, it is Claude, it is Perplexity, Gemini, insert whichever one is your favorite, because I'm sure by the time, even though I'm recording this episode very close to its air date, I am sure by the time this episode airs, there will be a new AI assistant tool on the market that people are talking about. So the internet and AI and social media, great for finding ideas, great for surfacing ideas, but it's terrible at showing you which ideas are sustainable, which ones have last, which ones have been through the ups and downs of the last 5 years, 15 years, 50 years in some cases. And it makes sense, right? I don't believe that anybody is out there trying to project a false narrative for the most part. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Most people are not out there trying to project a false narrative. But algorithms reward certain things, right? They reward, what they call authority or credibility. And part of that is how you speak, right? When you speak with certainty, when you speak with absolutes, when you say you have a framework, right? And you list your framework on your website or in your social channels, that automatically tells an algorithm that you have credibility. You actually have authority in the space. Now, it doesn't mean you do. It just means that you have used a language that it associates with authority and credibility. The internet and algorithms, they reward simple language, things that are high scoring readability, easy to understand. Quick wins are rewarded, right? The posts that get the most engagement in the first 45 minutes are the posts that get shared far and wide. The posts that take 3 weeks to spark interest, those aren't shown as much. And they will be if they get enough interest, right? Enough clicks, enough likes, enough shares in a short period of time. But slow and steady doesn't really get you anywhere on the world of the internet. And people who have real experience very rarely speak with certainty and absolutes and give simple answers and focus on quick wins and come across as 100% confident. I mean, I think I come across as confident, but I know for a fact I come across as confident to people who know me well. Either they've been following me online for years, they've come to my workshops, they've heard me speak. The average person who hears me speak, and this has actually happened to me in person and online and networking events where people will say, oh, you need to step into your power. You need to take up your space because you use couching language too much. And it's like, I don't use couching language because I lack confidence. I use couching language because I've been around the block enough times to know that while I'm 80% sure this answer is going to help you, there is a 20% chance that you are a special case that I have seen in the past that it won't work for. There's a 20% chance that there's something else circumstantial that neither of us are thinking about in the moment that affects the outcome. And there's a 20% chance that, it might be great advice. It might be valid advice, but it's not useful advice right now. Okay, it's not because I lack confidence. It's just because I'm confident that there are no absolutes in anything. And I am somebody who prides myself in honesty and integrity, and I think it's important to say that. Even when somebody says something to me and I'm like, that does not sound right, I will say things like, you know what? I would love to see that work. I will tell you, though, I've never seen it work in my experience. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means I've never seen it work, right? Again, it's not because I lack confidence. It's simply because I know enough to know that there are no absolutes. And I find like now, we joke about me being an internet dinosaur. My collaborator, Rachel Allen, and I, we co-host Dino Chats on Instagram, and we have a blast, right? And Mary Williams, who owns Sasquatch Media Grounds, she's had Dino Chat panel conversations on YouTube that have had Rachel and me and other people on them. And I will tell you that veterans very rarely say, this is the end-all be-all answer. They say things like, well, you ask them a question and say, well, it depends. Do you want this or do you want that? A lot of times they'll say, well, it depends on what your goal is. It depends on what you're building for. Like, it depends, right? Give me more context. Because my answer, I've been around the block enough times to know that the right answer has to do with some contextual things or some circumstantial things that you are facing with that other people maybe are not. They'll say things in the homeschool space, like Jen, she'll say, She never says this is what you have to do when working moms reach out to her. She'll say things like, she'll ask a few questions and she'll say, well, here's what worked for our family. Here's what worked for me when I was working outside the home. However, working inside the home, this worked. Here's what worked for me when my kids were little. Here's what worked for me when they were in middle school. Here's what worked for me when they were in high school, right? It changes as the children age, as your circumstances change, and so forth. The other thing that veterans often say is, I used to think this, but then I realized that, right? Veterans in any space with any area of expertise are confident enough to be honest about when they changed their minds and what led to them changing their minds. Back to the homeschooling example, I hear Jen and many of her peers, there's the Canadian homeschooling mom, Lisa Marie Fletcher, there is Deshelle McVeigh, and I'm thinking of like old school, like homeschooling experts like Pam Barnhill, and the woman who started Brave Writer, whose name I cannot remember right now, Read Aloud Revival, like all those like old school homeschooling experts, will say, well, how old are your kids? Because I will tell you right now, what worked at 7 didn't work at age 13. And what worked at age 13 never would have worked when they were 7. And again, it is really hard to build a large following around a platform that is known for saying, it depends. I used to think this, I then thought that. That's the other thing is social media followers in particular, they really want you as a person. They want to be able to take a snapshot of you right now and have you never change. Think about some of the viral stars you've known and some of the scandals that have happened over the years. And a lot of times it happens because there has been some change. Some well-known marriage author and speaker gets a divorce. Well, now we question all of the advice they ever gave, right? Because how could they be experts if they're now divorced? Somebody talks about, the importance of positive thinking and faith in the face of a health crisis. And then if they talk about a low moment where they were considering that it wasn't worth continuing on with life, when they were at a low point, when they just really were hoping that they would die quickly because the pain was too much, then readers will go, but how can you say that and have written this? Were you lying in this book? Is that what happened? You were lying, weren't you? No, right? They're saying like, I believe this at this point in time, and this is something I believed at another point in time. But it's hard, right? It's hard to build a large following. It's hard to get recognized as an internet quote unquote expert when you are a 360-degree, fully functioning and complex human. And bringing this back to the homeschooling thing, because that's what Jen and I were talking about. But also, when I decided to start homeschooling my daughter again this year, I went back to my conversation with Jen. I went back to Jen also because she is my resident expert on all the things. And, and I talked to a few other people about homeschooling. And it was funny is kind of when I decided to start homeschooling again, I spoke with Jen and I said, what we should do? We were talking about this interview and I said, we should do a summit like for the homeschool dinosaurs. Like I'm not a homeschool dinosaur, but I know that I value the guidance from the dinosaurs, especially now that I am going to be homeschooling a child who will be going into 6th grade, and where I live, 6th, 7th, 8th grade or middle school. So, those middle school years are not easy on anybody. So I know who my chosen experts are, but my chosen experts aren't the ones that show up on the For You page a lot on Instagram or on YouTube. And so, and at first we were joking, and then Jen's always like, well, if you wanted to pull that together, I'd totally be on board. And I'm like, you would? Like, what do you, then it's like, what business do I have doing a summit on homeschooling? Well, I'm a community builder. So I know a lot about building community. I've facilitated tons of online events. Like I know how to put on a really good online event, and I know how to build community, and I definitely know how to build what I would enjoy participating in this space. So I went to somebody who specializes in summits and online business and things like that and told them the idea. I said, I'm thinking about putting together this summit that would be for newish homeschoolers, say first 3 years. And what was funny is the suggestion that was made is I should narrow the target audience to just first-year homeschoolers. And the person who suggested that said, I'm in my second year and I've already got things figured out. Like, I don't need help. So I don't think you're going to get very many people in their second or third year who'd be interested in what you're talking about. You really just need to grab the first year people because only they would be interested. And I thought that was funny, right? Because again, that would be like me saying, well, I homeschooled for 2.5 years before. Like, I don't need any help now because I already know everything. I'll just go back to the old curriculum that I use. I'll go back to, all the things that I was doing before and it'll be perfect. Well, I already know it wouldn't be perfect. First of all, what interests my younger daughter is not the same as what interested my older daughter, who was being homeschooled at the same age. Also, their capabilities are different. Their interests are different. My older daughter is very mathematically inclined and my younger daughter is much more artistic. And I don't want to throw shade on anybody because the reality is like, how would any of us know whether our advice holds up in an experience we haven't yet had, right? So if I'm a brand new homeschooler with, I don't know, my oldest kid is 10, how am I going to know whether what I'm doing right now will work in middle school or in high school, right? How am I going to know whether what I'm doing right now is going to avoid me from ever becoming a burned out homeschooling parent? How do I know it's going to avoid my kid getting burned out, right? How do I know it's going to support successful launch into adulthood, until I figure out what my child wants to do and they start looking around for college or tech school or, career options, right? Certain things you can't know until you get there. And so, the issue isn't intelligence. It's not information. In many cases, the issue at hand is time. There are certain things you can only learn through time. Perspective only comes through the accumulation of experiences. Yes, we try to borrow secondhand experiences from experts, but their perspective is limited to their experiences. And, and we can't pretend it's not. So some things that I think are important to just bring up and I'll say tease out from my conversation with Jen is, number one, there is no one right way to homeschool. And I think that is something that sets Jen apart from a lot of people. She is adamant. It's also why it benefits her to serve working homeschool moms, because a lot of people out there are like, this is the this is the language arts curriculum to rule them all. And she could say, yeah, that's a great literature arts curriculum if you've got the time and ability to be shoulder to shoulder with your child, because it requires a lot of parental involvement. Not all working homeschool moms have that. So if they need something that's a little bit more hands-off, there are some other options, right? So number one, there is not one right way to homeschool. She built an entire community around the idea that families have to create systems that fit their own lives rather than copying somebody else's approach. And I know for a fact that's what attracted me to her initially, all the way back in 2020 when I first met her. I think it's what still attracts people to her. It's why she still has a very thriving, vibrant Facebook group, even when everybody wants to talk about how Facebook is dead. The other thing, speaking of that Facebook group, is that community matters almost more than anything because the context matters. And if you listen to my other podcast with Gwen Bortner, right, The Business You Really Want, you probably don't listen to it, but if you're into a business podcast, that's a good one to listen to. Working homeschool moms oftentimes feel like they don't fit in anywhere, right? Because advice from each community that focuses on traditional homeschool families ignores half of their reality. They can get homeschool advice, but a lot of times the homeschool advice assumes that the person who's homeschooling doesn't work for money outside the home, or that whatever they do that generates income isn't a higher priority or as high of a priority as educating their child. They can go and get advice about working remotely, working from home. They can get advice about being a working mom. But all of that advice typically assumes that their kids are in some type of traditional school, either public school or private school. So there really isn't any place where they can have their entire context served other than Jen's community, other than the Working Homeschool Mom Club. So none of us can really fully realize our potential if only half of our identity is being served. And the third thing that I really appreciated about my conversation with Jen is her strong stance that perfection is not the goal, right? She talks openly about how it took multiple tries with math programs and curriculum to figure out which one fit. And then by the time she figured that out for her son, she then had to go through that whole exercise all over again for her daughter. And yet now, as an adult, that daughter who hated math growing up works in a job that's pretty much all math. Like she's just crunching numbers all day long. And that doesn't happen by getting lucky, right? Oh, I just happened to pick the right curriculum. Or, you know what? I found myself an influencer with 3 million followers and I just did everything they said. Those are the kinds of lessons that you pick up when you stick with something year after year. When you're honest to others about your challenges, right? You accept feedback. You offer feedback like, hey, this isn't working because of this reason. I don't know if it's a me problem. I don't know if it's an it problem. I don't know if it's a her problem, but maybe you can help me tease this out. And they're lessons that come from sticking with it, right? Not just dropping and running when things get hard or when you start to feel lost or inept. And so, going back to this idea about the summit, right? It's like Jen would say, Tonya, I did not give you the idea for that summit. That idea came up all by yourself. And, she's partially right because before I interviewed her, I was talking with Rachel about creating a series of dino summits. And, so it's those of us who are internet business dinosaurs, right? Having this series of summits that cater to a few different markets. So, yeah, I was already planning to host some summits this year. I wasn't planning to host a homeschool summit, though, until I started homeschooling myself, went back to my interview with Jen, and realized, how much knowledge and experience and, librarian-like perspective that she can offer that a lot of other people can't who are, right now the favorites in the homeschooling market. And, there's also... And she knows a lot of dinos, right? Because she's been at this a long time. So, Deshelle McVeigh from Literary Adventures for Kids, which was the language arts curriculum that we used when we were homeschooling before. And it is language arts curriculum we'll use again because my daughter she says she hates reading. Reading's hard for her. There are two different things, right? But again, it's Deshelle who has taught me that. It's not that my youngest hates reading, it's that it's difficult and she needs me to help her make that reading more accessible. And Deshelle, her curriculum does have some ways about doing that. And so, so now I just want to tell you a little bit about the summit because it is coming up. And this show is not really about pitching offers. That's never what it's been about. It's really been about shining a light on the fact that what makes you weird makes you wonderful. But one of the weirdest things in homeschooling is being a working homeschool mom. It was weird in 2019 when I was first looking into it. It was definitely way weirder before that when Jen and Deshelle were doing it. It continues to be weird now. One of the ways that we made homeschooling work for us instantly this spring is there is a day program in our community, meets twice a week. I don't know any of the other moms who are working unless their work is tied to the day program. They work at the day program. So when I talk about I work full time, I have to do these things and that things, and I'm working this all around meetings. And so no, I can't volunteer on the days that the day program's going on because I rely on that child free time in order to have meetings and do podcast recordings and things like that. It's a big gap to fill is what I'm going to say because there are thousands of homeschool creators online. There are thousands of people. Most of them are selling you a thing, right? Some of them are true creators, right? They're making money off of views. They're making money off of a day in a life. This is how we do story time at our house. This is how we homeschool, 10 kids ages 2 to 20 in our house. This is how we do this. This is how we do this. This is how chores are part of our home education program. Yes, there are creators doing that, but a lot of, homeschool experts are selling something. They're selling a homeschool curriculum, they're selling a homeschool planner, a homeschool plan, courses, etc. But for me, I look at all that stuff and now because I've homeschooled before, I realize that what I need is really what everybody needs, especially those first 3 years, right? I need advice and perspective from people who have homeschooled through the hard years. People who have tried and changed methods more than a few times so they can tell me what worked, what didn't work, and why. So I can see okay, where does my experience and my circumstances fit in the overall picture? I need to learn from people who survived burnout so that I can maybe avoid it. because I will tell you, the first time I was homeschooling, I was a crispy critter when it comes to burned out. I mean, I was fried to an absolute crisp. I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night. I was working, and we were homeschooling 7 days a week. There was no off time for me at that point. Part of that was work demands. Part of that was the pandemic, because the pandemic hit shortly after I started homeschooling. And part of it was just my own lack of awareness of knowing what was enough when it came to homeschooling, right? Realizing that I didn't need to do public school at home. I didn't have to teach my kids uninterrupted for 6 hours straight. I need to hear from people who have balanced careers and different types of careers, right? Because the way that I earn money now is not the same as the way I earned money before. I was much more of a freelancer, kind of like direct service contractor, then I'm much more of a business owner now. I need to learn from people who have navigated neurodivergence, right? Like both of my kids are neurodivergent, but they do not have the same neurodivergent archetype, right? They're just very different phenotypes to how their brains are wired, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. So I can't just rinse and repeat what I did for my older daughter. And because right now the plan is to homeschool for 3 years and then to transition to a traditional high school, that may or may not happen. So I also need to learn from people who have successfully launched their children into adulthood, because I either need to make sure that my child is well prepared for high school or well prepared for college, tech school, workforce, whatever may come after high school. But with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade being middle school years, I don't feel like I've got much time to make mistakes. And so I really need to hear from these experts. And to be perfectly honest, that's why I'm creating the summit. So I can handpick the experts that I know I want to learn from, and then also create a community of other people who are like me, homeschooling. They don't have to necessarily be working in homeschooling, but homeschooling, relatively new in the homeschooling journey, and wanting to learn from people who have been there, done that. And so the name of the summit is called Been There, Homeschooled That, right? Like you guys know, I am clear, but I'm very rarely clever. But it seemed like the appropriate name for a summit built around practical guidance, the human side of homeschooling, and the long game of raising independent learners. Because that is the one thing I will tell you I loved about homeschooling the first time around. I missed about homeschooling when my children were attending, a charter school, and even when my older daughter went into public high school. I love homeschooling's focus on cultivating independence and like ownership over learning. You just don't see that in public schools where I live as much these days. And so I'm just going to want to bring this back to like, why am I hosting this thing? Like, I feel like I've talked about that a little bit, but also there's a little bit of imposter syndrome going on. Back to, you could be confident without experience. I don't want to be that person who sounds like they think they're an expert when they're not. The reason I'm hosting the summit is because I am not a homeschooling expert, right? I'm not a veteran homeschooler, but I am a veteran community builder. And so if I want a judgment-free community of early stage homeschool families to connect with, to learn with, and to learn from together, learn from veterans together, then I may as well be the person to lead it. Because, there are a lot of summits for homeschooling families, but a lot of them are led by veterans and experts, and some of them have the curse of knowledge. They forget being at that stage of not knowing what they didn't know. And so that's what I feel like I'm bringing to this table. Deshelle McVeigh and Jen Mackinnon, as my co-hosts, are bringing the expertise and the connections to the homeschool experts. I know how to vet remarkable people. I know how to find people who actually care about the people they serve. I know how to create spaces where different perspectives coexist. One of the things I'm most excited about in this summit is facilitating a live panel of experts and just doing a really great job of moderating a Q&A. I also am really good at helping people discover the community that they didn't know they needed. People who thought they were perfectly okay just going it alone, only to find out when they encountered people with a shared purpose and a shared vision that they actually did have a gap to fill all along. That's what Find Your Freaks has always been about, and that is what the Been There, Homeschooled That summit is all about. So if you are in your first few years of homeschooling and you feel like every expert online is telling you to do something different, if you're wondering whether you're already messing up and you know what, you're like secretly raising serial killers and you just don't even know it because of all the mistakes you've made, or if you'd rather learn from people who have actually made it through the teenage years than from somebody who just settled on the curriculum for the very first time, then the Been There Homeschooled That Summit is exactly for you. Now, it is free. It is going to be free. It goes from, we're in the midst of registration right now. It is going to take place free from September 1st through 3rd is when you will be able to participate in the live sessions. But the recordings are going to be available all the way through September 8th, because if you are anything like me, right now it sounds like, yeah, I can do that. September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And then on August 30th, something's going to happen. Kid's going to need a doctor's appointment. You know, the dental appointments you scheduled 6 months ago, you realize that they're taking place tomorrow or whatever. And suddenly you can't make it like you thought you did and you think all is lost. Not the case, right? Replays will be available through the 8th. So really, there's no reason why you can't come. You can't attend, and it's free, so it's not like there's any money out of your pocket even if you do register and you can't make it. All of our speakers are going to be veteran homeschoolers, every single one of them. Been doing this for years, at least a decade, and they've launched their kids out into the wild. Some of them are still homeschooling, some of them will be speaking on the other side of homeschooling, but they will definitely have been there, done that. And, you know, we're really going to focus on practical advice. We're going to focus on a variety of perspectives, and ultimately, you are going to encounter no one-size-fits-all philosophy. It's not going to be like this is the end-all be-all for you. It is choose your own adventure. Your mileage may vary, but no matter what, we're here to hold your hand along the way. Now, there is going to be a paid upsell, which will allow you to instantly implement everything you learn. If you choose to go register, you will find out all that information then. You will find everything at the dinosummits.com/registration. Everything you need will be there. And if you have any questions, you know how to get in touch with us. So let's bring this to a close because we've talked enough about this. Every episode of Find Your Freaks asks the same question. I ask the same question of my guests. I ask the same question of you. Who are your people? Sometimes the answer to that question is not someone who is exactly like you. Sometimes it's the person 20 years ahead of you who is generous enough to turn around and tell you what they wish they knew when they started. That's what the Been There, Done That Homeschool Summit's all about. It's not about finding perfect answers. It's really about finding and gathering together experienced people who can help you ask better questions so that the answers you come up with are the right answers for you and your family. Hope to see you then.